Just like we see the Buddha, when he sits in this kind of upright way with a sort of open chest, we want to try and get into that position in a sort of comfortable way for us. So whatever way the legs support the upper body. And then a minute just being simply with the breathing at the tip of the nostrils, anchoring our awareness there. And perhaps just merging a little bit with the softness and the clarity of the breath, as it goes in and out, just being with that feeling. As it goes in, it opens up the body. When it goes out of the nostrils, we just let go of anything that's kind of hindering the body and mind for the practice, for the teaching tonight. And in that space, just tuning in to your own motivation. What was our intention? Our kind of sense of will, that brought us to the class this evening. Just clarifying that for a moment. As we learned in the karma module, intentions, the kind of the most important aspect of karma, what motivates us. It's like kind of how we create karma through our intention. So as Buddhist practitioners, we always try, at least at the beginning of the day, the beginning of practice, the beginning of anything, we want to move into, action, your body, speech, and mind as much as possible, getting that clarity and intention. That's what helps us to create really positive seeds in the mental continuum. That's the kind of food for enlightenment, for our spiritual practice, this positivity of our motivation, and really trying to deepen and broaden that as we progress through the Lam Rim. We progress through these courses. So last week in the class, we discussed, we kind of talked a little bit about around, the causes of refuge. So until we have freed ourselves from suffering and the causes of suffering, the first two noble truths that the Buddha taught, there is suffering and there is a cause. So it's very hard to find our way out of that. The two truths, they resonate with us. We can feel that life's not satisfactory. We can feel that we have dukkha, the Sanskrit word for suffering. We feel that in our lives. That's what motivates us, brings us to spiritual practice, to spiritual teachings. But to really get the depth, the understanding our own suffering and the causes of suffering, to uproot that as well from our own experience, our own mental continuum, continuity consciousness, we need a reliable refuge to help us complete that work. So refuge, in other words, causes that we develop in our mental continuum, as we go through the Lam Rim, we develop these in our mind, and the first cause of refuge that we discussed last week was starting to begin to have this clear awareness of the danger of falling into what we call the lower realms, or an unfavourable rebirth. We have continuity consciousness. There's never a time when we don't experience, we don't create karma, we don't exist, We have this consciousness that travels from life to life and has been travelling since beginningless rebirth. So first cause of refuge, seeking a refuge that has the qualities to free us from that's the first cause of refuge, recognising that danger, that at the death time, until we've developed our mind in certain quality, there's a danger that we might fall into an unfavourable rebirth. Either in the lower realms or even in the human realm, we can see there's so many varieties of existence just in this realm that we wouldn't wish for on anyone. Never mind ourselves, our future rebirth. So that fear, it's a little bit like, going through a forest filled with dangerous animals. And what we want to do, we want to seek a path that doesn't have that danger in that place, that's free, that's peaceful, free from those dangers. So we would go in the opposite direction from where there's danger there, So it's a bit like that. It's like a wholesome fear, recognising there's a danger, and with wisdom, taking the correct path. So refuge affords us that kind of protection. So another cause of refuge that we try to develop as we move through the Lam Rim into the middle scope is this kind of deeper reflection of our own, comes from a deeper reflection of our own samsara. Cycling of death and rebirth caused by karma and delusion. That's the kind of basic fundamental state that our consciousness is in. It's clouded by karma and delusion. And their suffering is a little bit like, right now, it's having this constant unbearable itch that we keep scratching. But we tend to just make it worse by engaging in what we discussed in the first class, the 8 worldly concerns. Seeking reputation, seeking wealth, kind of material comfort, and avoiding, trying to seek those. It's just like scratching the itch or the suffering, it doesn't go away. It doesn't they don't fully satisfy. They just kind of relieve the kind of immediate suffering for a while. What we need is a medicine that's completely relieve that suffering, that itch, that kind of pervades our life. I mean, we're always trying to escape from hot and cold, hunger and thirst, physical discomfort, mental discomfort. We're trying to always escape these in some way or another throughout our lives. But by just taking refuge in material objects, and food, clothing, shelter, it's not enough, it doesn't bring that satisfaction. So what we need is a reliable refuge that can completely eliminate suffering and the causes altogether. So recognising this itch that we're all under the control of, the causes of suffering, then again we seek a reliable refuge. We have a kind of fear or a deep awareness of that, and then we seek a refuge that's free from that, who's eliminated that itch, those sufferings altogether. And when we take refuge, the experience is like when we recite the refuge prayer, we recite like mantras that embody the qualities of the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. So the refuge prayer is like, has this kind of power to ignite that potential to gain enlightenment, the seed, the Tatagarbha Buddha essence that we have. And reciting the certain mantras, because they embody the level of the 3 capable beings, they also have this power to ignite our wisdom, to help the mind, support the mind on the development of these 3 paths to enlightenment, the 3 capable beings. So we need both when we take refuge. We need a sense of recognising the danger of the situation we're in, recognise within ourselves suffering and the causes of suffering, the 2 truths. And then we need to understand and sort of develop, really understand the clarity, the kind of all the qualities of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Then we feel like a real trust in their qualities and a trust that we have also this ability to awaken them within ourselves. That's the process of deepening our experience of refuge. So together, we're going to recite the refuge prayer. Just again, feeling if we can, just imagining in the vast sky, the Buddha mind is always compared to kind of the vastness and clarity of the wide open sky. And just like the sky, there's nowhere on this earth that we can't, there's nowhere where there isn't sky, It pervades, wherever we walk on earth, we see the sky. So similar, Buddha mind, it pervades all phenomena. So that's why they use your analogy, sky. It's like it pervades everything, the quality of the mind. And within that pervasiveness of the deep blue sky, we just try and feel this kind of sun-like energy of the Buddha, glowing with the wisdom and the fully developed compassion that he embodies, seated on a lotus sun moon cushion, having this golden, radiant, very peaceful body, just as we see in the images in the gompas, maybe on your altar, maybe you have an image on your altar. I mean, we see so many images of the Buddha everywhere these days. People have in their garden. It's known to, feel this, everybody feels this peace radiating from that image, reflecting the inner qualities of the Buddha's awakened mind. So we take refuge in the Buddha, we take refuge in the Dharma, the teachings, the qualified teachings, the medicine to relieve us, to completely relieve the itch of suffering. And the Sangha, the friends, the qualified friends who are able to guide us along the path. So we recite the prayer once in Tibetan, twice in English. Sangye chodan soge chognam la chanchu bardu dagni kyapsu chi dagi chin soge be sonamge drola penjir sangye drupar shog. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my merits of generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. So just feeling that for a moment, maybe become a Buddha. We may continue at this level, not give up our practice, not give up our aspiration for inner development on the path to enlightenment. And we do this, we have this aspiration to benefit all sentient beings. By whatever level of practice we're in, whatever level of mind, we dedicate it for others. And then for Shakyamuni Buddha, just like rays of the sun streaming forth, we get filled with the blessings of the body, speech, and mind of Shakyamuni Buddha. As we recite the mantra a few times, again, this mantra, all the mantras always embody all the qualities and the path of the three capable beings. The whole Lam Rim is embodied, all the realizations in those mantras and syllables. So we just receive that inspiration and blessing. Tayada mune mune maha munaye soha. 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 Okay, so this evening, welcome again, everyone. And this evening, what I wanted to do is just start, as we noticed in the motivation for this evening, I talked about two causes of refuge that we need, the cause of thinking about, that we have this danger of having a lower rebirth, we don't know what our level of consciousness is going to be at the time of death, I mean, when we're sick and, different things are going on, we don't know, So that what it's saying is, we have to develop kind of an awareness of that and this practice of taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha to protect us from having a difficult rebirth. So that's one of the qualities of taking refuge. It has this ability. Another cause of refuge that I discussed last week was this kind of fear, or we can say, I don't like really using the fear for us for us Westerners, but we can say an awareness, really getting a deep awareness of suffering, our own suffering and the causes of suffering. And that again comes a little bit more when we study the middle scope, but we touch upon it as we have to as we go through these modules, the two truths that we're under the control of suffering and the causes of suffering. So another cause why we take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha is we have an understanding of that and recognizing that we need a higher refuge. We need to take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha to free us from that because they hold those qualities, developing a faith and conviction. So these two are in line with, practicing the sort of lower capable being in the Lam Rim. And then there's a middle capable being when you develop this mind of renunciation and a kind of strong aspiration to get out of samsara, to free yourself. That's what the mind of renunciation. So there's the third capable being, and this also becomes a cause of refuge, in light of being the teachings in that level of capacity. So does anyone remember from last week what was the sort of third cause of refuge? The third, one that we mentioned last week. I purposely didn't mention it here because I wanted to see who remembered or who would like to give it a go and say what was the third one we talked about. Why else do we take refuge? And it's already reflected in the refuge prayer. That gives you a hint. There's three reasons why we take refuge, because we know that we have continuity consciousness and we want to avoid a difficult rebirth. So we develop that sort of faith and conviction in the three jewels to free us from that. There's another fear. We don't want to be in samsara, so we develop we a deep understanding of our own samsara. We take a deeper level of refuge. And what's the third one? The third reason or cause for taking refuge? Terry, got your hand up.
The third one would be for knowing that other people are suffering as well and not wanting them to suffer. And for us to be able to develop that bodhicitta attitude.
Yes, very good. Yeah. So the third one and the deeper one, which again we study a bit more when we go into the higher, further on in the Lam Rim topic, is then we generate this kind of awareness that, oh my gosh, I've got this amount of suffering going on, This we understand we get a deeper level of suffering and the causes of suffering in our own experience. And then we just reflect that out to others. It's like, well, every being's the same as me. They have Buddha potential, but it's blocked right now, it's clouded. And may I, through freeing myself with suffering and as I develop, my mind and the causes of liberation, the causes of enlightenment, may I also, having this kind of courageous wish to be able to benefit others, developing the stages in passive bodhicitta. So we take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sanghas because they have the qualities, to ripen the quality of enlightenment within me. So just on a basic level, that's the third cause of refuge. Okay, great. Thank you, Terry. So, so this week we're going to talk about the benefits of taking refuge. There's 8 benefits. And then we're going to go in a little bit more to the actual qualities of the 3 jewels, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So that's what we'll talk about this week. So 8 benefits of taking refuge. So first one is you become an inner being. As Lama Yeshe says, taking refuge means that Dharma wisdom is always with us. So the first benefit it means that it's often called the holy gateway or door for entering the teachings. So basically, we don't really take refuge until we have some recognition of our own suffering, some recognition that the causes of our problems really come from our own mental state, the quality of our own mind. And in that recognition, we take a sense of responsibility, that we need to do something more about our mind. So it's a mental process here of kind of having some sort of wake up call that, oh my gosh, I'm suffering. My mind's, what causes my problems is my own, mental process. It's the quality of my own mind, the color of my own mental consciousness. It's because I'm clouded by suffering and the causes of suffering. And so that makes us, we start to go more inward. We start to, instead of making the problem about out there, through hearing the teachings, we start to realize the problem is really in here. It's within my own mind. So it's taking refuge has become like this inner being where you realize you need to really, really take care of your own mind. And we're going to do that by relying, you recognize that there's some recognition that the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha have this ability to be able to guide you out of this cloud of suffering, out of this mud pit of suffering, all the way up to enlightenment, So it's like this first step. The first step is you become like an inner being. We stop blaming stuff on people and things out there. Now we don't have that complete mental transformation happening right away, but at least it's a stepping stone. I think when most of us took refuge, there was some sort of aha moment. For those who have taken refuge or those who are listening now, you get deeper and deeper experiences these aha, like, you hear about karma, death and rebirth, the continuity of consciousness, the samsara, and we get a sort of deeper sense of how much the causes our own problems come from our own level of mind. It's not really happening out there. And the deeper we understand that, the deeper we kind of realize that, the more and more we become an inner being. And the more and more we naturally seek refuge in the Buddha, his teachings, and the community, who are more evolved than us. So that's the first benefit, of taking refuge. And in that process, again, taking refuge deepens throughout our practice, through years, months, years, decades of practice, But even initially, even those who have taken refuge, we can see there was a turning of the mind away from, I need to stop blaming out there and start really working with my own mind more and more. And refuge, it's a little bit like, let me just see my notes for a moment. Yeah, I think it's a little bit like, as Lama Yeshe says, when we take refuge, it's like we activate the process of taking refuge. It's kind of when we recite the prayer, when we start to reach out to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha on a daily basis. By, if we take refuge, we take a commitment to recite the prayer every day, at least to have a short reflection on Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, what that means to us. And that prayer itself, it's a little bit like when sugar activates yeast, it helps the dough rise. So refuge is a little bit like this. It sort of activates our mind. It moves our mind in that direction towards our inner wisdom. It has that kind of power. All these prayers, all these mantras, they have that kind of power to sort of activate and open up, waken up the mind. There's actually a practice you can do, and we'll do it as part of the practice day, where you recite Namo Gurubhaya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Buddhaya many, many times. And you think about the qualities of the Buddha, then you recite Namo Dharmaya. It means prostrate to the Buddha, prostrate to the Dharma, prostrate to the Sangha. But you recite Namo Buddhaya so many times, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, and you reflect on the different qualities of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And each time we reflect, it's like creating this seed, for us to be able to receive the qualities of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. That's the quality of that practice. When I did the practice, so it's one that you can do 100,000 times, refuge practice, of reciting each one, Namo Buddhaya 100,000 times, Namo Dharmaya 100,000 times, Namo Sanghaya 100,000 times. And I have to say, when I completed the retreat, it was like so peaceful. I felt really joyful after it. It's a very nice practice, just advertising. And it's a very easy one to do. It's not too complicated. Some of the other Nundro practices, preliminary practices, have more complications, but this one's just, it brings a lot of peace and joyfulness in the mind because we're visualizing the Buddha, we're thinking about the qualities of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And you just kind of get filled up with that, It's just like, I just found it really peaceful and inspiring. So just a little advertisement for that. So, second benefit of taking refuge, you become a candidate for vows. So again, some of us who have taken refuge already, or if you haven't, and at some point you decide to take refuge, you can actually, in the presence of a qualified teacher, you can take refuge, and there's a small ceremony you do, and also you have the opportunity to take vows. So, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the last class, but at that time when you take the refuge vows, you also take you take the vow of no killing. That comes automatically with your refuge vow. Because of course the basis of any spiritual practice, whether you're Buddhist or any practice, is really as much as possible is to avoid harming others. That morality, non-harming. Because like me, no being wants to be harmed, I mean, that's just sort of, it's very basic and simple. And I mean, again, for many, it's not easy to practice, especially sort of maybe mentally and with our speech, but at least physically, we take this vow not of no killing, because nobody wants, everybody's life is precious to them, even, the smallest bug, animal, whatever, it's precious to them, their body. So on that basis, we have to take that one, but we also become a candidate. So you can't take other vows without the refuge vow. And it wouldn't make sense, because obviously we take refuge with a sense of some sense of faith and conviction in the Buddha's teachings. And then what the Buddha taught, is this, the first thing we practice, morality, observing karma. So on the basis, it's like the refuge vow is like almost a container. And then on that basis, you can start to take some vows to kind of develop or practice immorality. So again, you can also take, there's also vows like bodhisattva vows, tantric vows, but the lay vows are, the 5 lay vows: no killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, no intoxicants, and no, what one did I miss? The other one. I think you all know what they are, but so without, of course, you wouldn't want to take that, and unless you've got some, already some conviction in the 3 jewels. And again, these all kind of start to, taking refuge in all these sort of, every time on the basis of taking refuge and then engaging in vows, everything starts to kind of, as Lama Yeshe says, sort of light up this Dharma wisdom within us, and we start to align more closely with the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. We're aligning ourselves with their qualities. We're getting on track, so to speak, with the path to enlightenment. And as Lama Zopa Rinpoche said, even if you don't do much practice, but you live in the vows, whatever vows you've taken, with a sense of refuge, Rinpoche says, it's unbelievable how much peace other beings receive from you if you're not killing, you're not stealing, you're not lying, no sexual misconduct. Even if you can't benefit, Rinpoche would say you give so much peace to other beings. Can you imagine? Your speech is always honest. Nobody, you're not, whoever's, certain people around you, they're not going to steal from you. They're not going to, at least, mentally it may be difficult to harm, but you're not in the fear of being killed or beaten or anyone by others. I mean, there's so many places in the world you can't rely on that, So that's a beautiful thing to offer to others, or vows, just that alone. So refuge, the other benefit is you avoid the lower realm. So we mentioned that as the first cause of refuge, when we understand that danger. So we have a kind of sense of that, our continuity consciousness, that we have this continuity experience and karma that goes from life to life. And then, if we take a deep sense of refuge, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, that process has an ability to free us for the lower realms at the time of death. So as Geshe Lundrup said, although taking refuge alone will not immediately bring Buddhahood, a result of taking refuge, you can also be born with the extraordinary leisure of a special human life with all the good qualities, possible qualities. So, and we can see already there are these kind of 8 special qualities which you can read in the Lam Rim of a precious human life. We may not have all of them now, but we have a fair amount, especially when you look just at the precious human life and all the characteristics of that. We have many of those right now. So we have already taken, as I always say, a very good care of ourselves in past lives. We're not perfect yet. We still have delusions. But in terms of where we've situated ourselves. Not bad, yeah. I mean, really not too bad compared to the rest. When we look at the rest of the world, the human population, the animal population. So developing a level of faith, day by day, week by week, year by year in our practice, this faith and conviction through studying the Lam Rim, studying the qualities of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, recognizing that need we have to rely on them. That if we get familiar with that, then at the death time, just alone reciting the refuge prayer, visualizing Shakyamuni Buddha, has so much ability to protect our mind at the time of death. Lama Zopa said, even during our life, if you've developed a little faith in the qualities of Dharma, bodhicitta and emptiness, we hear that and we think, okay, I might not get all of that this life, but I have faith in that. Rinpoche said, if you think about that at the death time, that can protect our mind, just rejoicing in those qualities that we may not have. And similarly, if we, at the death time, if you think even an ordinary monk or nun, maybe not someone who's what we call ultimate Sangha, with realizations on mainstream, but an ordinary monk or nun who you think, oh, they've lived a good life, they've kept their vows, you can rejoice in that. Rinpoche said even that can protect at the time of death, it's the level of what we call more relative Sangha. So just having that sort of level of positivity. So again, just thinking and making our mind familiar with these kind of thoughts, as we meditate on the refuge prayer. So as Geshe Lundrup Sopa also says, your proper practice will gradually make all obstacles to practice vanish. You will not be born in a lower rebirth or as a human without complete faculties, access to the teachings and so forth. So that's a kind of benefit of taking refuge, one of those other benefits. So it kind of automatically through that benefit, we avoid the lower realms. That's the kind of qualities the power that the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, that prayer, that kind of inner experience has, for us. So again, you also another benefit of taking refuge is we easily know, so what do we need to develop realizations? We see this also in the example of the great masters who have practiced in the past. We need to create merit and we need to purify. So by meditating on the three jewels, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, as I mentioned last week, translates as the three rare sublime ones and their qualities before we engage in a practice, just taking even a minute or two, rather than just saying, for some of us who've been practicing a while, we tend to just say the prayer and we don't sort of bring to mind some of the qualities. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche is always saying we should just try at least a little bit to think about the meaning of the prayer. So before Lama Zopa Rinpoche would start teaching, before we go to sort of form, like we're doing just this evening, we recited the refuge prayer. So again, before Lama Zopa Rinpoche would teach, he would always start, and he would often, he would usually have long motivation, but many times Rinpoche would stop and just explain a little bit the meaning of the refuge prayer, Sangye. Sangye Chodang, Sangye, what it means, and that really means Sangye means kind of purified all the mistakes and kind of completed or developed all the qualities. And it's what that is actually quite mind-blowing, what Buddha mind is, Sangye is Buddha, but what that really is like incredible. So even just touching on that in a moment, thinking about the qualities, even just if we remember one quality of the Buddha and just thinking, gosh, he really spent many, many eons, lifetimes, purifying the mind of anger, attachment, especially ignorance, grasping at true existence. I mean, the longer we're in the Dharma, we see that's not an easy feat, So just again, even just a small rejoicing, thinking about the qualities of the Buddha, qualities of the Dharma and Sangha before we recite the prayer, we have, it creates so much merit for us. So that's the benefit of taking refuge, but not just reciting, but just even a moment, just connecting with that power that the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha embody. It creates an incredible, because of their power as well, the imprint it creates is very powerful. So maybe even if we see a holy object, or we get up in the morning and we're, some of us might be doing the practice of making water bowls, or we have a small altar and we offer incense, just for a minute when we put our palms together, thinking about who the Buddha was, the qualities of the Buddha, or if you have a teacher, the qualities of the teacher, the qualities of the Sangha, just one or two that we can bring to mind, and just that's so powerful for the mind. And it immediately, sort of, as Lama Yeshe says, ignites this kind of wisdom, or Buddha nature. So there was, again, I mentioned about Angulimala. We talked about the finger necklace, that I think I've taught about Angulimala. Was it in, I think, the module before? Because he created so much heavy karma, so much killing karma. So when he saw the Buddha, if we remember the story, he had collected all these fingers from all the beings he had either killed or beaten, he was on the wrong path, and he was trying to like collect fingers of 1,000 people, and he was making a mala out of them. So because the Buddha had no fear, he approached Angulimala, and he was and Angulimala tried to chase the Buddha, and he was the last one he wanted to get the finger from. So he would have his necklace was complete of 1,000 fingers. But just by when he finally came into the presence of the Buddha, because you remember the Buddha kept walking and Angulimala couldn't catch him. And because of the power the Buddha had, he kept walking and somehow Angulimala wasn't able to catch up to him. And eventually, when he did catch up to the Buddha, or relatively close, the Buddha said, that I have stopped and have you. So what he meant is I've stopped killing, have you? And just those words had so much impact on Angulimala. He developed right in that moment a sort of refuge of faith in the Buddha. So this is kind of the power of the Buddha, enlightened mind, enlightened consciousness. Just a few words can have so much impact on one being. And it was said that just due to that power of refuge he took in the Buddha at that time, it already purified so much of the karma killing. I mean, he still had to do practice, but he was actually able, due to the power of his refuge and the power of regret, he was able to purify the karmas of those life and actually achieve realizations in that life. So as Lama Zopa said, every day, just developing this sense of refuge in our heart and the Buddha Dharma Sangha by remembering their qualities has a great power to purify the mind. So the sixth benefit is you will not be bothered by harmful creatures or humans. There's another example as well in Lama Zopa Rinpoche mentions it in the Lamrim prayer, in the Lamrim book, the yearbook. That so what it means is, and I think I've had quite a few experiences of that when I'm in scary situations, or recite refuge or Tara, or I mean, here we're saying refuge prayer, but refuge can mean refuge in a sort of particular deity that you're maybe practicing, Tara or Chenrezig. It can be Shakyamuni Buddha. I mean, basically, it's any being or deity that embodies the qualities of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So Rinpoche said at the time in India, when they all had to go, when the Chinese invaded Tibet in 59, and so many thousands of monks escaped to India, and they lived in this concentration camp, ex-concentration camp. That's the quarters they were given by the Indian government. Not that they were prisoners, but that's what they gave them to stay in. It was an ex-concentration camp. So again, and then at other times they were given land, So at some years later they were offered land by the Indian government, and of course it was just jungle. So the monks had to, now you can go down to South India and the monasteries are beautiful, really well built, amazing, but that was just all jungle. And the monks had to go out into the jungle and build the monasteries, So many times they were very afraid. So Rinpoche said they would think about His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and then none of them got attacked by wild animals. So that's another way, certainly for Tibetans, they take a strong refuge in His Holiness the Dalai Lama when they're any fear, any kind of danger. And I always mention this story. There's one man who used to work here. I lived here 20 years ago, and there was one man who he was an old hippie, and he did a lot of kind of hiking around, you know. He was often just sleeping rough on the street, but I mean, that was the life he chose, you know. So, but as he got older, he was finding that more difficult. And so he would usually just try and sort of hitchhike from one place to another so that he knew there was some place he was going to be able to stay at the end of the road. You know, he did spend many times sleeping under bridges and whatnot when he was younger, but he got to a point when he felt like he couldn't do that. So anyway, he came here and worked for some time, but he was sharing this story because at that time, he wasn't Buddhist, but he had this kind of strong faith in Tara. And he played the guitar and he liked to play, you know, he used to chant the Tara praises along with his guitar. And he said that one time he was on the road, you know, and because he was getting older, he didn't want to sleep out that night. So he made strong prayers to Tara because he was needing someone to stop. So, of course, Tara's this female deity and she's very young, youthful. She's like 16. And he said that he was reciting the Tara mantra, asking for her help. And then, you know, not long after, this green van stopped. And of course, Tara's green, stopped just ahead of him. And then a sort of young lady came out of it with long dark hair, and Tara's got long dark hair. So he sort of developed even stronger conviction in Tara at that time. So these deities, these practices are very, you know, very powerful for removing harm, for us not to be harmed by creatures or, you know, harmful humans. They have that kind of power, the power of refuge. So the next benefit is benefit number 7, that we will, you know, on the basis of having this vessel, kind of this container of refuge in our mind, we will effortlessly and easily achieve temporary and long-term aims. So we can think about the Tibetan. One example is the Tibetan community. So this is Geshe Zopa. Sometimes I have some quotations from his book, his commentary on the Lamrim, and this is His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So Geshe Zopa was actually one of the first monks, I think, that His Holiness sent to America to learn English and study American culture, and he ended up establishing a monastery in Wisconsin. So he's, you know, the Tibetan community, I think I mean, they've rebuilt an incredible community over in India, you know, and I think it's because of the power of their faith in His Holiness the Dalai Lama, their faith in their, you know, in their practice and their refuge, you know. So considering the situation they came over to India in, you know, they've done incredibly well in the West, you know, to kind of redevelop the Dharma, also spread it in the West, and also to try and preserve it as much as they can outside of Tibet. And of course, the last benefit is also on the basis, because refuge is the basis of really all the other realizations. If we have the stronger our refuge, then the stronger we'll be able to achieve enlightenment. You know, it's like Lama Zopa Rinpoche has this book called Sun of Devotion or Faith, Stream of Blessings. So I think the more aspect, you know, there's these different levels of faith that we talked about last week. So especially the one we build up our faith and devotion through our practice, through our study, you know, through listening to the teachings, reflecting and meditating. So the deeper that becomes, I think that the stronger the blessings we can have through the practice. And again, those two benefits really come to life, you know, as our faith and devotion grow. So these, just in a little bit of a nutshell, these are the 8 benefits that are included in this topic of refuge, you know, just reflecting on what we get from our practice of refuge, how it's so important. And this is what Geshe Lundrup says, meeting the refuge objects once again, you will study and practice this extraordinary Buddhist path. Then by training in the special higher path, it will not take a very long time for you to attain enlightenment. So again, the more we sort of go through, you know, there's different, you know, the lower capable being, the middle, the higher capable. Each one, as we deepen each of those, then they deepen each other, you know, as we keep going through the path and reflecting and going through and through each time we go through, our understanding, our experience gets deeper and deeper. So next, we're going to move on to 4 reasons, so recognizing sort of more like the benefits of taking refuge. Why we need to take refuge, or what the causes of refuge are. Why we need a reliable refuge? Because we're in this process of samsara. We have this danger of going to the lower realms. We're also under the control of karma and delusion. And also, eventually, we have, maybe some of us do, we develop this aspiration to develop bodhicitta, this great mind that has these qualities and abilities to benefit all sentient beings and guide them out of suffering and the causes of suffering. So in order to do that, we need to really check up the qualities of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. That's who we're going to rely on. So we check up some of the reasons why is Buddha a reliable refuge? We need a refuge that's free of faults. So we need to kind of investigate their qualities a little bit more deeply. So the first one is Buddha. One of the qualities they say the Buddha is fearless. So this is an example here. I couldn't get a picture of this main story I was going to tell, but this is an example. So as many times during the Buddha's life, I mentioned about Devadatta. Devadatta, he tried to kill the Buddha on 2 or 3 occasions, but the Buddha, because his skill, his wisdom, and his power, he always avoided it. And this is another example here where Devadatta actually pushed a rock down over the Buddha. He did slightly harm the Buddha. I think there was one piece, the rock smashed into pieces, and one piece kind of hit the Buddha's ankle. So at that time, he did slightly harm the Buddha. But the Buddha was also, what we know is that Buddha's always aware of whenever there's a danger coming to him, as he was with the elephant when the Devadatta set the elephant on him. So there's another example to show the Buddha's fearlessness is that he was invited by this kind of Jain practitioner. So at that time in India, there is still now Jain practitioners, the religion of Jainism. And his name was Sri Gupta, and he invited the Buddha to his midday meal. But he had secretly planned to poison the Buddha. However, the Buddha, because he has clairvoyance, he knew that was Sri Gupta's plan, but he decided to accept the invitation. So instead of, because he kind of wanted to, anyway, what happens is even in the face of harm, you see the Buddha knows everything that's going on, but he has the power and wisdom to be able to free him, to avoid that harm. So during the meal, he actually told Sri Gupta 3 stories of previous lives when he was reborn as a pheasant chick, a hare, and a peacock king. So you can also read many, it's very inspiring when you read the tales when the Buddha talks about when he was reborn, either as a human or an animal in previous lives, and how was it you practicing a bodhisattva in his previous lives, and all the kind of challenges he went through to practice the bodhisattva path. So he said at this time, he told Sri Gupta the story when his previous lives, when he was born as these 3 animals, he was also able to overcome the danger of fire and being poisoned. And during that meal, somehow the Buddha was able to avoid the food that Sri Gupta was offering him that was poison, that he had poisoned. And he also told Sri Gupta during that meal that he also remembers a past life when Sri Gupta himself tried to poison him. And somehow in that moment, Sri Gupta got kind of, through the power of the Buddha and how he explained the story, got kind of ashamed and generated a lot of regret. And it caused him to take refuge in the Buddha. So somehow the Buddha has this kind of, even in the face of danger, he's able to transform that situation, not just to kind of avoid the danger for himself, but it's all about transforming the mind of that being. So he put himself in the situation where he could have been poisoned, but he has the skill and the means to be able to not just avoid the danger, but also to kind of change the mind of that being in that moment. I mean, even in this tradition, when Lama Zopa Rinpoche passed away, we can see in the example of some of our gurus, when Lama Zopa passed away, Kajala, she's also a female recognized as a Dakini in this lineage by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. She also said at that time that she felt that Rinpoche took on some obstacles, for the Dharma. So even beings in, now, and there's stories of beings taking on obstacles, great beings, and then taking on the obstacles and then passing away. So this is the power of these great beings. These have ability to take on danger almost and transform it into something really positive. So this is one of the qualities of Buddha, is this kind of fearlessness. So another one is he's extremely wise in guiding all beings from suffering. So another exact story that I always enjoy is there was this disciple called Pantaka. Not that you're going to remember that, but anyway, he was known for being very dim-witted. So basically, he was very difficult to teach or tame, or because he had such a dull mind. And even if you would recite, like, he couldn't learn anything because as soon as he wrote out one or two words, he would sort of forget where he was and have to go back to the beginning again. If he was taught anything, he would only remember two or three words, and then you'd have to repeat it to him again and again. So he had this very sort of dim-wittedness, dull mind, to the point where even the Buddha's disciples were, finding it difficult to teach him. So out of the Buddha's skill, the Buddha gave him, a few words that he had to memorize. Something like, and he gave him this job of cleaning the temple. So he became a monk, and he was given this job of sort of cleaning the temple. So the ground is clean, but is my mind clean? So that was kind of the word that he was using. So he was able to eventually, it took him a long time, but he was able to eventually memorize that. And then actually through the power of just that simple practice, he achieved realizations in that life. And so of course, he was known for being very dull and dim-witted. And at some point, the Buddha asked him to go and teach the nuns. And at that time, the nuns thought that he was like kind of this really dull monk. They hadn't realized that he had realizations. But somehow through, when they went to teach him, through the power of his, when he started to teach, they realized that he had achieved some kind of realization, and he showed some miraculous powers as well to kind of subdue the nuns at that time. So this is the kind of quality the Buddha has. They're able to skillfully guide beings according to their level of mind. And again, I could see that with, I would say in terms of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, gave us each of us so many. I'm not necessarily saying Rinpoche's a Buddha, but I think we can all recognize that Rinpoche's a special being, a high saint. So Rinpoche's ability was it gave everybody something sort of unique and different to them. Like we all had certain practices that we had to do. There's certain ones we all did, but then Rinpoche would give everybody individual practices. So it's quite incredible, that mind. They can see the mental capacity each and every sentient being and what you specifically need to guide you. And it doesn't matter how difficult that person might seem to subdue, like the dim-witted one here, the Buddha was able to give him a practice that not only just benefited his mind, but was able to achieve arhatship in that life. So it's very inspiring, that kind of ability that the Buddha holds. So another quality that the Buddha has is this great compassion for all beings without discrimination. So again, at the time of the Buddha, there was there still is a caste system in India. But in Buddha, of course, he came from a great royal lineage, But of course, then he abandoned that and he lived an ascetic life and achieved enlightenment. So, of course, when he became a Buddha, he had this kind of non-discriminatory compassion, and he had great courage and equanimity. So he welcomed all castes and creeds into his spiritual community. It wasn't about what caste, what colour of skin you are, what caste you're from, whether you're male or female. It was about your, just directed upon your enlightened potential, your potential on the spiritual path. And also in terms of, nuns, at that time, of course, 2,500 years ago, it's only the last, 50 plus years that women have a kind of different status in the world. But so for so many thousands of years, women had this lower status. So it's quite extraordinary, really, that the Buddha gave ordination to women. He, the first person he ordained was his, It was a family member. I think it was his mother or his aunt. No, not his mother, sorry, his aunt. His mother passed away when he was not long after he was born. But the first Buddhist nun that he ordained was his aunt, and also his foster mother, who became his foster mother, Mahapachapati Gotami. So in the beginning, it said that the Buddha hesitated a little bit to ordain women when he was requested. And we're not quite sure why, but it's possibly because he just had to, the status of women was very low and he didn't want it to affect the, status of the Dharma. Nobody really knows why he hesitated, but it's also possibly because it's also more dangerous for women to walk. At that time, they were walking around India as monastics. So, but either way, he did accept, many women became ordained. So, again, that was quite extraordinary at that time, for women, for the Buddha to accept women as not as to be ordained. The Buddha works for the sake of all beings, regardless of whether they help or harm him. So again, it sounds kind of easy, but we can see, if we get a little bit of harm for someone, either mentally or verbally, some resistance builds up towards that person, we build up a sort of wall. So I'm showing this picture of Lama Zopa Rinpoche here as well, because I should have mentioned it in regards to maybe the third point here. But just the way that Lama Zopa Rinpoche used it, you can see how he's offering to the beggars here. How Rimshi would offer money, because I mean Rimshi was incredibly generous, and how he's offering it so respectfully to the beggar there. Most of us would just kind of put it in the pot or just put it down, but Rimshi would go through to every single one with kind of hands together and offer to the beggars in a very, very sort of beautiful, respectful way. And again, that's just showing that mind and non-discrimination. There's no lower or higher going on in their mind. There's not even a hint of pride there. And then again, in terms of helping or harming others, no matter whether they help or harm, I mean, of course, Buddha Devadatta was this kind of, you could say, a thorn in the side of the Buddha, although the Buddha never experienced Devadatta like that. But because, the Devadatta created a lot of problems at the time of the Buddha, for Lord Buddha. And there was a time when Devadatta actually got sick because the Buddha had been sick and the doctor had given the Buddha very strong medicine. And Devadatta kind of encouraged the doctor to give him the same medicine because he felt like, well, he was the same as the Buddha. He was sick. He needs the same. And the doctor was saying, no, but you can't take that strength of medicine. You've got a different body and you're different for the Buddha. And anyway, Devadatta was pushed, and said, no, I can take that. And of course, he got very, very sick. And at that time, the Buddha actually went over to heal Devadatta and said, he made this proclamation, if I have equal compassion for Devadatta as I do my own son, Rahula, may he be healed. And through the power of that sort of proclamation, Devadatta was healed, So it's really quite a feat to have compassion for beings, no matter how much they harm us. And of course, there's a story that we read about some of the Tibetans who come out of Tibet that I mentioned before, who one particular Lama who was imprisoned. I don't remember his name, but when he went to visit His Holiness, he was imprisoned and tortured for many years by the Chinese. And when he eventually was freed, he came over to India, and usually, they always are the ones that come out of Tibet always have an audience with His Holiness. So at that time he had an audience, and he said to His Holiness, I was very afraid when I was tortured, and His Holiness, oh, I was very afraid when I was in prison, and His Holiness says, well, is it because of the torture? And he said, no, I was afraid I would lose my compassion. So it's it's sort of noble state of mind. So that's what the Buddha embodies, this kind of, it doesn't matter if you help or harm, there's no chance that the Buddha works equally for all. So going in a little bit more to the qualities of the three jewels, the conventional and ultimate three jewels. So the Buddha jewel. The Buddha jewel each jewel has a sort of conventional, I'll just bring the three of them up just now, a sort of conventional quality and ultimate quality. So conventionally, the Buddha jewel or what it's composed of, sorry. Conventionally, the Buddha jewel is composed of, conventionally, the form bodies. And these are called what we call Rupakaya. I've sort of touched on these a little bit in previous classes, but not much. But basically the body, what this is what we're trying to achieve in our own practice, right? The Buddha jewel, the Dharma jewel, the Sangha jewel. So what are they? The Buddha jewel, conventionally, it's what we call form bodies. And they're called Nirmanakaya and Sambhogakaya. And then the truth body is the Dharmakaya. So the truth body, Dharmakaya, basically it's the omniscient mind of the Buddha and the emptiness of that mind and the true cessations, the cessation of all suffering that exists in that mind stream. So that's the fully developed mind of a Buddha, Dharmakaya. And that's kind of what we are taking refuge in that. That's what we want to become. The form bodies kind of come out of, manifest from the Dharmakaya. And they consist of Rupakaya means form body, and they consist of Sambhogakaya, the enjoyment body, and Nirmanakaya, which is what the Buddha came in, what we call the supreme Nirmanakaya, when he manifested enlightenment in this world. That's a manifestation body. So when we achieve enlightenment, what we want to achieve is with this Dharmakaya, the wisdom body, the Buddha, and also these form bodies, which can benefit different levels of being. So we benefit from the Nirmanakaya or manifestation bodies. The other level of body, Sambhogakaya, enjoyment body, can only be seen and receive teachings from if you're already an Arya being who's had the direct perception of emptiness. So that's how the Buddha manifests bodies in that way. And that's just a little bit of a nutshell there. Dharma jewel, the qualities of the Dharma jewel. So again, the conventional one is what we use, all the day, the scriptures, the texts, basically the 84,000 sets of teachings that the Buddha taught, when he was in this world, he taught these 84,000 sets. So all the sutras, Abhidharma, Vinaya texts, anything that we're studying and practicing, that's what we call the conventional Dharma. So we take refuge in that as well. We need that right now. It's in many ways the most important one. I mean, that's how we really receive, is through the teachings, through the texts. And the ultimate Dharma jewel that we want to achieve is also the realizations that come from studying and meditating those texts and teachings. The true paths, the cessation of all the suffering, the cessation of all the different levels of subtleties, delusion that we have in our mental continuum. So all the realizations of the bodhisattvas, the wisdom realizing emptiness. So these are all the kind of qualities that are embodied in the Dharma jewel. The Sangha jewel, so again, there's conventional and, there we go, ultimate. The Sangha jewel. So this is one just to get, sorry, I went on by mistake there. A little bit more clarity on. So, so if you're anything like me, I mean, generally speaking, that this is what we say conventionally is the Sangha jewel. So I mentioned in the last class, I think the fourfold, like Sanghas, that's what we could say, it's really more like the monastic community. And it's really defined as 4 or more fully ordained monastics. That's because for a monastic community to function and do certain things, like renewing their vows, purifying their vows at the end of the month, doing retreats, you have to have 4 ordained monastics in that community for them to be able to do those kind of rituals and practices. So that's why conventionally, that's why we say that's what the Sangha jewel is. So when we say I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, again, this is what we're taking refuge in. These conventional levels of the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, and the ultimate levels of the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. So really, of course, we can think the Sangha is one monk or nun, and of course, layperson. Another way that the Buddha did explain the Sangha was fourfold Sangha, fully ordained monks and nuns, and also the lay Sangha who are holding refuge, and then on that basis the 5 lay vows. So you can also see it like that. But sometimes people come to a centre and think, oh, these are all the Sangha here, but a lot of this, sometimes at centres some people haven't even taken refuge, or maybe they're not holding some of the vows, and then we get a bit disillusioned because we think, oh, the Sangha aren't behaving very well at that centre, and that's because we're calling them Sangha, but actually it's more like people who live there, but they're maybe not necessarily living in the vows, you know. They're maybe not necessarily really studying, practicing and have a strong sense of refuge in Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. So we have to be a wee bit careful when we understand what Sangha means. So it doesn't mean that, you know, us as practitioners, especially if we hold, you know, we're holding refuge and we're practicing the lay vows, then definitely we can say, we're part of the Sangha. You know, we could say that. But the Sangha jewel really, even on the conventional level, is for fully ordained monks or nuns, monastics. And of course, ultimately, again, the ultimate Sangha is the kind of realization, you know, it's a being, an Arya being who holds the direct perception of emptiness in their mind, the realization of emptiness in their mind, one or more beings who hold that. So that's what we mean by, sorry, ultimate Sangha. So there's these different levels. So of course, this takes a little bit while to absorb all this, so don't worry too much. But we're just touching on these points. And again, you can follow up with them a little bit more in the readings. But I think the Sangha one's quite important to remember that. That's really most correctly what we think about as a Sangha jewel. And we could say we're part of that, you know, if we're holding these, refuge and the lay vows. So again, so the pictures we see the Buddha after his enlightenment show a monk in India on a throne or among the trees. He has a beautiful body, perhaps an aura around his head, but he's still a human body. So we're just touching a little bit more on the qualities of the Buddha's body, speech, and mind here. So again, that's just one manifestation of the Buddha, as I said, and that's called Supreme Nirmanakaya, supreme manifestation. It's supreme because the Buddha showed the aspect to achieving enlightenment when he came onto this world. And at that time, there was no teachings available. So he showed the path, you know, he showed that there have been in this over thousands of years, there have been three previous Buddhas who appeared in this world system. Excuse me. But at the time when the Buddha appeared, those teachings had faded out. You know, they were no longer existing in the human realm. So the Buddha came into this world system and manifested enlightenment. So that's what we call kind of the Supreme Nirmanakaya. And that, even that body alone, you know, the power of the Buddha's body, the Manamakai, Sambhoga, they all have incredible qualities, you know. So as Rinpoche said, every pore and hair has the power to manifest in different ways to benefit sentient beings. So again, you can study these in a lot more detail, but just getting us some idea, you know, what the Buddha, you know, who is the Buddha, you know, what are the qualities of his body? So David Lynch, and this is just it's talking even, so we won't have the opportunity to see the Buddha unless you have, I don't know, really pure karma. Maybe you will, but I don't know. But generally speaking, we won't be able to have the quality to see the Buddha. So Lama Zopa always says we can, you know, when we look at, and even there's quotations and set from the scriptures, from the text that, you know, we can't see the Buddha now, but we have, you know, if we look at an image of the Buddha as if it was the real Buddha, you know, we can get an incredible blessing from that meditation, you know, just looking at the Buddha as if it was real, the quality, image or statue of the Buddha, and just with some recognition, you know, or some faith that this embodies all the qualities of the Buddha, as if it was the actual Buddha, making offerings, prostrating with that mindfulness, that kind of meditation. So just to kind of give one example. So one lady here, Trish, she's doing retreat at the moment, and she really enjoys David Lynch. So maybe some of you, if he's a director, a writer, I think he wrote Twin Peaks or directed Twin Peaks. So anyway, he passed away recently, and so she was just mentioning that he was one of her favorite sort of director writers, and that he was interviewed at one point, and he was asked during the interview, have you ever had an experience that you felt like you would just want to go on forever? And he shared with the person at the time, you know, that one time he went to this, I think he was in maybe not LA, I think, and he went to this museum, and there was a lot of Buddhist artifacts and relics that had come over from the East. And so he went with his family, and at some point he said he kind of wandered off on his own, and he started walking along this corridor. And at the end of the corridor, there was a huge statue of the Buddha, and he just came across it, and there was all this light coming from the Buddha, and he got completely filled with a light, and he just felt like this unbelievable joy. And he said it lasted for a few hours. And then it went away. And he said, that experience, I could have had that forever, you know. So, I mean, he practiced transcendental meditation in his life. And I think he was quite a moral person from what I've heard some other stories about him as well. So he wasn't necessarily a Buddhist, but I thought that was a great example. So at some point, you know, if you think about the power of karma and merit, you know, maybe he had some connection with that statue for past life. I mean, he wasn't being particularly, I mean, he was probably curious about all the artifacts, the Buddhist artifacts. That's why he wandered off into that section. But something happened, some karma ripened for him in that moment to experience that kind of bliss and joy coming from that image. And that was what he said had the greatest impact. I mean, that's the experience he remembers most in his life, you know, and he would just want to have that. So it's kind of like just it's very, anyway, I find that very interesting, that story, very inspiring. So just again, just some of the qualities of the Buddha's body. So maybe we can't maybe see clearly in the image, but the Buddha has what we call these 32 major signs and 80 minor marks. That's the kind of, and they all basically, they represent, each one of them represent you know, a kind of, it's a sign of great personage. The signs signify that he's someone of great personage, a great noble being. And the marks symbolize kind of the inner qualities that he has. And some of these were just, you know, some of these are mentioned in this picture. So each of these qualities and marks, they each have a corresponding what we call virtue or virtues that the Buddha's created in previous life. I mean, they all come about because it causes and condition, you know, karma that the Buddha created in his previous life. So there's a couple I wanted to mention, actually found in Alex Berzin, has a great website on Buddhism, and it's a commentary from Lama Tsongkhapa, just mentioning a couple of the qualities, some of these marks and signs, you know. So the top of his head has this crown protrusion, and it's made of radiant flesh, round and circling clockwise. When seen from a distance, you know, it's about 4 finger width high. But if you look closer, what happens is the height can never be measured. And it's actually one of the most difficult features of the Buddha's body to achieve, you know, to have this kind of crown protrusion. And the cause of having that, the cause of achieving this kind of the holy mark, you know, mark and sign of a Buddha, this comes from always visualizing his spiritual teacher on the crown of his head, as well as having visited temples and monasteries and engaged in spiritual practices there. So again, this isn't just one time visualizing the spiritual mentor or guide on your crown. And this is a practice when we go into, we'll have the module on the spiritual teacher. So we'll talk a little bit more about the sort of how we open up or deepen our connection with a spiritual teacher. But this is the result of having always visualized and having great respect for his spiritual teacher and visiting temples and monasteries in the past. So that's the cause of that crown protrusion. And there's one sutra, oh, sorry, back again. There's one sutra called the the Sutra of the Inconceivable, where one bodhisattva, so when you achieve a certain level of bodhisattvahood, so there's 10 bhumis or grounds on the bodhisattva path. So when you know, at a certain level of bodhisattvahood, you know, you can fly, you know, so you can do sort of incredible miraculous powers, you know, already on the bodhisattva path, never mind a Buddha. So one bodhisattva decided he wanted to rise up in the sky because he wanted to measure the height of the crown protrusion. And he said that it doesn't matter how many universes he went into with his miraculous powers, he couldn't find the end of the Buddha's crown protrusion. So it was just kind of like this, you know, it's like a light that just pervades all world systems, basically. You can't find the end of it. This is in the same context to talk about the qualities of the Buddha being inconceivable. You know, it's inconceivable for our mind, the quality of the Buddha's body, speech, and mind. So like that, even this bodhisattva couldn't find the end of the Buddha's crown protrusion. And of course, all the pores, all the qualities, they all embody wisdom and power, you know. Each pore embodies that. of the Buddha's holy body, and it manifests and can work simultaneously for many beings in many universes at the same time. So another quality that the Buddha has, another sign, is that on the Buddha's feet, and the palm of each hand is the impression. There's a 1,000-spoke wheel. And the cause of having that is having always greeted and escorted again his spiritual teacher and having had a selfless attitude of offering personal service to others. So we can see that a little bit in the Tibetan tradition, you know. I mean, if any of you, I don't know if any of you here have maybe been involved. I mean, every time at the centres when we have lamas come in or teachers come in, it can take us a long time to prepare. And especially with the example His Holiness the Dalai Lama. You know, we take many, sometimes when His Holiness goes, he just went recently to India, South India, and I saw, you know, for weeks before they were painting, cleaning, redecorating, doing huge amounts, you know, to prepare the place for His Holiness to come, because of course they regard His Holiness as a Buddha in person, you know, Buddha compassion. So this again comes from this kind of, you know, the deep devotion that the Tibetan tradition have, not just for His Holiness, but, you know, understanding that this creates the causes for their own enlightenment, for them to have this 1,000-spoke wheel, or to have, you know, many of these marks and signs, quite a few of them the causes are connected to one's relationship with one's spiritual teacher, you know, practicing faith and devotion and respect for one's spiritual teacher. So that's a huge part in this tradition, you know, acknowledging and respecting the spiritual teacher. And of course, it's an organic process, you know, but you can see here how they greet His Holiness with parasols and umbrellas, and everything, even greeting with the parasol, the umbrellas, the victory banners, each thing creates a karmic result by offering it when the teacher arrives or during their visit. So even Lama Zopa Rinpoche, when he was with us, spent a long time in many centres, you know, training Westerners, because it's not a part of our culture, you know. We don't also easily connect with this idea of respecting teachers, you know. It's not deep in our culture. So never mind when we meet the Dharma and spiritual teachers, it takes some time, you know, to have a healthy relationship with the teacher and understand kind of how that relationship works, you know. So Rinpoche spent years, you know, training us on how to prepare when lamas come, you know. So it's yeah, so that's one of the results that comes from having this kind of devotion and paving the way, and you know, for when the teachers arrive, you know, greeting them with great respect and with certain, you know, processions, music, offerings. Each one of those has a karmic result as we offer them when the teachers are either there or when they arrive, you know, greeting them in a specific way. And there's one story I find, maybe we'll just finish with this. There's one story I find really inspiring, and I just found that it's been translated. There's a prayer, Rinpoche recommends this daily practice that we do, transforming a suffering life into happiness, becoming wish-fulfilling for others. And there's one Lam Rim prayer that we do, and it mentions this great bodhisattva who was always weeping, the weeping bodhisattva. He's called Sada Prarudita. And he actually existed you know, he was in this world many eons ago, and he was called always weeping because he was always weeping because he wanted to find, or crying because he wanted to go and receive teachings from his spiritual teacher, you know. So he was always crying because he couldn't find his spiritual teacher. So one day um, you know, he discovered where his teacher was, and he wanted to go there and request teachings on the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, but he didn't have anything to offer. So finally decided that the only thing he had to offer was his body. So he went to before he went to greet his teacher, he went to the town and he shouted in the middle of town, "Is there anybody who wants to buy my limbs or my body?" And of course, no one came to buy it. And all of a sudden, this sort of incarnation of a sort of Brahmin man appeared and said, "I would like to buy your flesh and bones." Somebody appeared and eventually said they would buy them. And so when he heard that, he was so happy. So I mean, for us, can you imagine? We don't kind of desire the teachings to that extent, you know, and we're not asked to do that, you know. So anyway, he was so happy that somebody said he wanted to buy his body. So he went somewhere to try and find somewhere to sort of cut off a limb. And then some girls asked him and said, well, what are you doing? He says, well, someone's accepted to buy part of my body and I want to offer it. You know, I want to make offering to my teacher, so he was going to sell his body so then he would have money to make offerings to his teacher, you see. So they said that was extremely foolish to do that. So anyway, they convinced him not to do that. But what his aspiration was that he wanted to do that because he was a bodhisattva and he understood very deeply the kind of the benefits of receiving the 32 major marks and 80 minor signs of the Buddha. So his prayer was that he had so much wish to benefit other beings, so much wish to get enlightenment that he was willing to sacrifice his body, or cut off a limb of his body. That was kind of the power of devotion he had towards the Buddha and achieving the qualities of the Buddha. So maybe it sounds a bit like an extreme story, but I find it kind of really inspiring to have that amount of devotion, towards the teachings, that amount of devotion towards wanting to become enlightened for all sentient beings and for his teacher. They had nothing to offer, so he was willing to sell part of his body, so he would be able to make offerings to his guru for these teachings. So it's yeah, it's very inspiring, to think. Sometimes when we read life stories of holy beings, it can I find like biographies of holy beings particularly inspiring, even though I can't practice like that, just by rejoicing and thinking, well, that's amazing, I might not be there yet, but that quality rejoicing gives some energy and inspiration to our practice. Just like we've shared before, sharing about the life story of Milarepa. He was another example who he genuinely wanted to achieve enlightenment for all sentient beings, so he went through great hardship with his spiritual master, building a 9-story building at least 2 or 3 times, to be able to receive the teachings and to be able to practice, So when we read about the qualities of the Buddha, we can also use it in terms of thinking about biographies of masters, who practice to be able to develop those qualities and eventually embodied those qualities because we need a lot of inspiration in these practice in the path, So reading previous biographies, reading about the qualities of the Buddha's holy body. Next week we will go in a little bit more to just touch on the speech and mind qualities of the Buddha. And then I want to go talk a little bit more about what are the criteria and the refuge vows. Some of us have taken refuge vows. So just going over them a little bit more specifically so we understand them more as well. But a refuge really develops through these two main parts, understanding the qualities, even if you just get a hint or taste, Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, what that is. And then understanding how we need to rely on that, the causes, why we're in samsara and that we have this potential to get out of there, So bringing those two together, that's what deepens our practice of refuge, developing the causes, the wishes to develop renunciation, the wishes to develop enlightened mind, and seeking sort of that refuge, that deep support in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. The deeper our sort of conviction in their qualities, the deeper we feel the blessings and the support and the protection that they really give. So that's kind of what we're trying to do in refuge, develop these two parts, these two limbs, these two aspects. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
I had a quick question from the reading.
Yes, Kate.
Kate, yes. The one of the readings they emphasized it seemed to be that people didn't take refuge in like alternate philosophies, and it seemed to mention that quite a lot. And I didn't know how much of an extent that we should be considering that as a part of the refuge. And so I don't know what my question is, but if you might say just a few words about that, that might be helpful.
Yeah, do you mind, because that's going to be part of the topic next week when we talk about, the actual the criteria and what that means to take refuge. So we'll touch more on that a little bit next week, if that's okay. I'll go into that a wee bit more detail. But thank you, yeah. We'll make sure it's clear, hopefully clear enough for you next week. And if it's not, just ask it again, yeah. Are we getting a sense of, some of us have heard refuge teachings again. Are we getting some sense of what really what we really feel the practice of refuge is. I mean, I think we do refuge all the time. You know, we take refuge in things all the time. What we're doing is opening up the gateway to an inner refuge. What that really means, deepening our inner refuge, our potential to achieve the quality Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and creating the causes for that to happen. You know, that's really what the Lamrim is all about. Our mind's getting closer. Why do we have an image if we have an altar at home? The three things that we want to have on our altar, the three main objects that we want to have on our altar is an image of the Buddha, whether it's a statue, a picture, whatever we can manage, something in the Dharma, a text, sutra, and then also a symbol enlightened mind, So usually that's mostly what you have is an image of a stupa there, because that's what we're trying to achieve, the body, speech, and mind of the Buddha. So that is our refuge. So that much more we know what the qualities of the body, speech, and mind of the Buddha, that much more faith and conviction we develop in that that gives more energy to the practice. We're trying to take refuge in that quality all the time. But Ladan?
Yes, my question is about the Tonka that you have. I don't remember the name of the. Yeah, when you see Buddha one in many and many in one.
Yes.
What this is the name is. I'm searching the name of this.
Well, this is actually there is a refuge field that looks very similar.
Yeah,
So usually,
refuge field.
when we do the
Yeah.
practice at the beginning, we take refuge in Buddha, just one image.
Yeah, I know.
I don't want to
But
overwhelm
when
everyone.
my question was when like when you want to deepening your practice of refuge, like every day, is it like, as they say, auspicious to imagine the refuge field?
Definitely. I mean, if you can manage to do, and this is when I mentioned about the refuge practice, when you recite just for everyone, there's a practice you can do of reciting the refuge mantra a certain amount of times. Namo Gurubhya, Namo Buddhaya, Dharmaya, Sangha. It's a very beautiful practice. So at that time, you would actually try to visualize something very similar to this. So again, this is a bit, I mean, I can't visualize that after 25 years, so this is like embodying the Buddha. So usually this is Lamas on Kappa, but you would have Shakyamuni Buddha, and you would have rows of different deities who embody different qualities. Tantric deities, bodhisattvas, Shravakas, like protectors. So it takes a little bit more to wrap our head around that. So we probably wouldn't go into that in this class, but that's definitely if you're able to develop to visualize even a part of that. And if you're doing refuge, the interesting thing is I thought I could never visualize all that, but when I started to do the refuge practice with the mantras, the visualization started to come more clearly. Focus on different beings at different times in the recitation. So I was able to start to feel the presence of these beings, in front of me. It's like you wake up something just wakes up when you start to really do these practices in the context more of a retreat or a daily practice. They just become more powerful. So I was actually able to feel like, oh, there's there's the dakinis and the protectors when I'm doing the Sangha. And so it does wake up. It does start to happen when you start to do the practice. It's quite
like it will be my long-term goal.
Yeah, no, it's good. And actually, out of all the preliminary practices, it's a very gentle one to do. Some of them are quite intense. Vajrasattva is a lot of purification. It's wonderful. Prostrations is also physically a lot. So refuge is very soft, it's very gentle and light and purifying. So I'm just giving a little bit advert here, but it feels really nice, and you just think about how wonderful the Buddha is and how great the Dharma is and rejoice. And, it's very uplifting. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Bernard.
Philip?
Yes, thank you. When I say I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Supreme Assembly, so the Supreme Assembly can be like all, or your Sangha, it can be like all the people you've known that practice Buddhism that have ever helped you. It doesn't have to be like I belong to this Sangha or this congregation or whatever that I go to every Sunday or whatever. it doesn't mean the same thing at all. It means all the Buddhas. Am I right? Am I along this
actually,
right lines?
Yeah, so what I was mentioning there, to get very clear on what the Sangha really means. I mean, as I said, Sangha, we could say we have our spiritual, I mean, you could, really conventional Sangha means fully ordained monks or nuns. That's just conventional. The ultimate Sangha are beings who have a being who has the realization of emptiness in their mind, a direct perception of emptiness. So when we go, but still, you could, it's just, I think that's really what we refer to as the Sangha, the proper definition of Sangha. Of course, you still want to acknowledge that there's being people around you, we're ordinary folks, us ordinary guys, who still help each other and support each other. We need that, we're not always in the presence of 4 fully ordained monks, we're not living in the monastery. But to
Right.
get very clear, and when you do the refuge practice, when you say Namo Sangha, you're actually visualizing these different beings on this field here, field of merit. There's all these different beings, and you
Yeah.
receive their realizations, because they embody a level of realization. So that's when we say Namo Sangha. That's actually what we're getting there. But even as Lama Zopa Rinpoche said, I mean, the tricky thing is for us Westerners as well, is we tend to it's what's happened a lot in the past in centres. People say, oh, the Sangha, this is my Sangha here. And then they think, oh my God, if you're a new person, you think, oh, this is the Sangha. When you go to a centre, it's like, no, we're people here just trying to practice, but we're not actually what you call the sort of qualified or conventional Sangha. We can help,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
people can get disillusioned by what they call the Sangha, when it's not really correctly the Sangha.
Right.
We're kind of people who are supporting you, and we should acknowledge that. And I think the longer you're in the Dharma, you do support, you do really appreciate the people who have supported you, and they're a type of Sangha for you, but it's not really the conventional Sangha. And
So if you've been somewhere like Copan where there's a lot of ordained monks, then that's like a Sangha where there's more than four or more or whatever, right?
Well, it's a monastery, so there you could, there you will find fully ordained monks. So that's a monastic community where you find,
Right.
fourfold Sangha. So that is termed as a community where you find Sangha, yeah, because they have 4 or fully ordained monks. I mean, of course, you could say I'm an ordinary, I'm ordinary. I would say I'm an ordinary Sangha. I'm somebody without realizations, but I don't completely fulfill the Sangha, conventional Sangha jewel, what that means. Yeah.
Yeah, you're ordained though, right?
I am ordained, yeah, but I'm
So
not somebody
you're
who you could
one.
say, oh, she's
I only
the
need
pure
3
cults
more in the
call me the
room here.
Sangha. Oh, there's the Sangha jewel there. She's the but still, I mean, of course, you still have respect. I mean, we should have respectful order. I mean, maybe we better say Dharma brothers and sisters, than Sangha. Each one Dharma brothers and sisters. That's what Rinpoche used to call us, Dharma brothers and sisters. Of course, I'm part of the Sangha. I'm ordained. But I don't fulfill like being the Sangha jewel on my own as one being, so because you need 4 fully ordained monks to be like this, what we call the Sangha jewel, or nuns, fully ordained monks or nuns. So, but I would say I'm part of the Sangha community,
Thank you.
and we all are, and especially if we hold lay vows and refuge, then we could say we're part of it. But it gets, it's just really being clear in our own mind how we define things. We can still say Sangha, but we're still aware that conventionally Sangha means four fully ordained monks, and then in the higher level, I mean, I do remember, sometimes even in my early days, I would go like, how many years have they been practicing? Then their mind's still not very good, our mind goes all over the place. So, and in the early days, you have a lot of expectations of people, and I had to kind of stop that expectation because it was just causing me a lot of pain. But I do
Thank you.
remember reading from at one time, I think one of my teachers, Lama Lundrup, says, really the only people you can fully trust, I mean, there might be a few beings in samsara because you have such good karma, but the ones you can totally trust are Arya Sangha. An Arya being who has a direct perception of emptiness. You can fully trust them There's no way, they're not going to lie. It's just not possible, you know. Or certain levels of bodhisattva you can fully trust. But below that, us ordinary beings in samsara, I mean, you know, it's hard. You know, we have relationships and we can trust that person for a while and then all of a sudden it doesn't work, you know. We think, oh, I can really trust this person. Sometimes we're very fortunate to meet a few people who that really is the case for us, you know. But even then, they don't have maybe the, you know, like when I look at the example of my teachers, I mean, they have like unbelievable qualities, not just trusting, but to guide me in a certain way, you know. So we have to respect our friends, our Dharma brothers and sisters, but we can't really, you know, there's only a certain level that we can sort of rely on them, you know. It's what we can really rely on is this, you know, Buddha, Dharma and Sangha dual, you know, really in terms of our spiritual development. But we can, yeah, we can chat, and we need Dharma brothers and sisters around us. We need people doing the same thing as us, you know, practicing the same path. We absolutely need that. We need that support, but we have to recognize they might have their limitations too. They're not perfect yet, yeah. Even especially as monks and nuns, ordinary ones. So, does that help?
Yes, very
Okay.
much.
Yeah. Okay, so we went over a little bit, but anyway, just taking a couple of minutes then to do a couple of short dedications. Always dedicating for bodhicitta or for the good heart, always us to be guided by the good heart. If we're guided by the good heart, then mostly I think we're going to be guided by morality, by not harming others. And also maybe guided more and more as we develop more conviction in the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, being guided by the three jewels, receiving those 8 benefits, you know, of not going to lower rebirths, you know, not receiving harm, external harm for humans, non-humans, more, you know, being able to purify, collect merit more quickly, all these incredible benefits as we deepen our refuge that we can receive, you know. It really, really holds the mind in a special way, this practice of refuge. So we wish this for ourselves, and we wish the richness and wealth of spiritual practice for all beings, you know. That much more we develop our mind, that much more a contentment comes, and inner richness and inner peace. So may I and all beings achieve this. And we'll just dedicate this prayer. Chanju senchu rinpoche magi panam gigurshik geba nyampa meba ye gonne gondu pelwar shuk. And we'll dedicate for the long life of the Dalai Lama and all the long lives of all these great teachers and all our friends, Dharma brothers and sisters who are practicing Dharma, practicing good heart, practicing non-harming, morality. We just dedicate for all their life, long life as well. We'll do this one. Saviour, the land, the snow teachings and transmigratory beings who extensively clarifies the path that unifies empty and compassion, to the lotus holder, Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Okay, thank you so much. And sorry it went a little bit over. We'll see you next week for the last class, hopefully. Yeah.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Angie.
Enjoy. Have a good week.
Thank you.
you.
You too.
Thank
Have a
you.
good practice.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.